Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Today I'm making 3 Valentine's cards using the Pinkfresh Studio Word Series stamp set as part of my Stashbusters series. And for my first card I'm going to start by making a wreath. First I will stamp down the large happy sentiment that comes in this Word Series stamp set, and I'm just counting the squares on my MISTI to make sure that I have it centrally. And then I'm going to stamp that with Simon Says Stamp clear sticky ink because I am going to be doing some heat embossing. I won't add the powder to it straight away though, because I will be doing quite a lot of heat embossing on this card and I don't want to warp it by heating it multiple times. This ink stays sticky long enough that I can just wait and do it all in one go. So next I'm going to add the flowers and leaf clusters and create a wreath around this sentiment. I realise it's a bit difficult to see in the video because of course it's clear ink on a white card base and it just doesn't really show up at all. But I'm basically creating a rough oval shape around the sentiment with these stamps. I don't actually have little stamp blocks, so I'm using lids from my ink cubes to hold the little stamps, and these work very well as alternatives to acrylic blocks if you do not have any. Once I had my stamping done, I added my embossing powder, which is Love from Lizi's Ivory Pearl embossing powder. I basically just dumped the whole pot of powder over the card front, let it sit for a moment, and then shook it off and tapped away any excess. I had treated my card base with my anti-static powder tool prior to doing any of my stamping, which helps to make sure that there won't be any embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to stick. Once I had all the powder on, I noticed there were 1 or 2 places that I felt needed a little bit more stamping, so I just quickly went and added in a few more leaves and flowers to fill the wreath out before heat setting. So when I'm happy with the layout and everything has the powder on, I will heat set it, and I'm just using my heat gun, which I have nice and hot. I had it heating up for a little while off to the side, and I'll melt all of that embossing powder. It does take a little while because there's so much embossing powder, but as long as you keep moving the heat gun, you won't burn your paper, so you don't want to keep it in one place for too long. And if you find that your cardstock is warping, then just heat from the other side a bit and it should flatten back out. I wanted to add some colour to the flowers as well, so I have taken some Spun Sugar Distress ink and I'm going to watercolour with it. I've pressed the Distress ink pad onto an acrylic block, and I'm going to use my clear Wink of Stella brush pen as my paintbrush of sorts. This works well because when you paint with it you are also adding glitter into your image, which just adds a little something extra. I'm not doing anything special with my painting, I'm just laying in the colour into the flowers, and the heat embossing helps to make sure it stays pretty much where I want it. So I'm just basically just adding circles of the colour over the flowers, and I do this in a couple of layers just to make sure the colour is as intense as I would like, which is still quite soft because I wanted this card to have a soft feel. The final element for my card is the rest of the sentiment, and I've heat embossed this with the same Ivory Pearl embossing powder onto a snippet of white card. This sentiment actually is one little stamp which has it kind of stacked and aligned to the left. I wanted them aligned centrally, so once I'd stamped them I cut them apart into 2 separate pieces, and then I'm going to pop them up with foam tape onto my card base, and I'm just using my T-square ruler to make sure that I have them lined up straight. So that completes the first of my 3 cards, which is a very soft and shiny feminine feeling card. The second card I will make also has a feminine feel and colour palette. For this one I started by creating a stamped pattern, again using the flowers and leaf clusters. I used Altenew Rose Quartz ink for the larger flowers and Lavender Fields for the small flowers, so a soft pink and a soft purple. And again I'm using ink cube lids as my blocks for stamping. For the leaf clusters, the leaves actually have like buds or berries at the end, so I'm very carefully inking up just the leaves with my Barely Beige ink, which is the closest to a light grey that I have, and then I'm using again the pink and the purple for the berries. So for the leaf cluster that has just the one set of leaves and then the berries at the end, I'm using the pink ink for the berries, and then for the other cluster, which has the two sets of leaves with the berries in the centre, I will use the purple for the berries of that one. And I'm just going around and using these to fill out some of the gaps in my pattern. Once I'm happy with all the stamping, I'm going to fill out the pattern a bit more by adding some sparkling dots using a glitter gel pen. And I'll just add lots of dots to really fill out that pattern and add a bit more interest to it. Then I wanted to bring in some dark grey elements, and I was thinking of cardstock for this, but I could not find any pieces that would be the right colour. So instead I'm going to make my own coloured cardstock, just using a snippet of white and an appropriately coloured alcohol marker. I use Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers, but any marker would work, and you could also create your own coloured cardstock with your inks if you prefer, with ink blending for example. But basically I'm just going backwards and forwards with my pen over the white snippet until I'm happy with the colour. I will use this snippet for two purposes. The first one is to add edging to my patterned panel that I created, and then I'm also using it to make my sentiment strip. And for this sentiment strip, I'm using the Happy Together sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm heat embossing it in white. And then I'll use my cloth just to wipe off the anti-static powder that I had put on there. I use my MISTI to help me assemble the card. By pressing the card base right into the corner of the MISTI, I can make sure that if I then push the panel right up to the edge, it will be perfectly flush to the card base. And I find this is a really good way to help me line things up. And I can also use the grid lines to help me know that I have the positioning correct as well. Then all that's left to do is to pop up the sentiment, and as with my first card, I'm using my T-square ruler to make sure I have this straight, and I just press that into place, and that will complete my second card. I decided to go much bolder and brighter with my third card, and kind of a completely different feel than the first two, and I'm going to be using blues for this card. This card could work for a masculine Valentine's card to give to your husband or boyfriend. I started again with that large happy sentiment, and I'm also using the You Are My sentiment to go with it, and I'm just stamping them both down at once using Dusk ink from Altenew. Then I'm going to add some colour to the flowers by using the back side of the stamp and Ocean Waves ink, which is just a step lighter than the Dusk ink. This just is a very quick and easy way to add colour to those flowers, and I think it gives a very interesting look to them. I'll add some more flowers and also some of the leaves in clusters around the sentiment, and I'm doing this to the top left and the bottom right, and I will stamp them the outlines with the Dusk ink and then use the same technique to colour them with the back side of the stamp using the Ocean Waves ink. And I will just keep going with this and building up the clusters until I am happy with how they look and how much colour there is to them. I also decided to lengthen the tail of the Y by adding another cluster of those leaves curving round, following the curve that's already there, just to make it a bit more interesting. Once I'd finished my clusters, I realised my card was a bit off balance. The stamping was more to the left and the right hand side looked a bit bare. So I did bring in another stamp set here. You wouldn't have to, you could use pattern paper or something to help balance this. But I brought in the diagonal stripe border stamp from Simon Says Stamps Crafty Friends stamp set, and I used the Ocean Waves ink to stamp that onto the right hand side, and then to add a little border between the diagonal stripes and the white area of the card, I have masked off with some post-it tape, and I'm just blending over some of that Dusk ink to make a very narrow strip between them, and that completes my third card. So here's a quick recap of the cards I made. The first one was the pink and gold wreath with the kind of loose wreath stamping. The second one is the pink, purple and greys for the floral pattern stamping. And then the third one was the blue with the clusters and the 1-layer card. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you'd press the like button, and if you didn't, you can press the dislike button, which is right next to it. I'd love to hear which of the cards you liked most, and if you've ever tried doing this kind of technique where you do multiple cards from one stamp set. All the products I have used for this card will be linked down in the description box below if you'd like to find any of them and see more of them. If you'd like to see more of my videos, there are a couple more showing on screen now that you may find interesting, and you can also press the subscribe button which is on screen to make sure you never miss any of my videos in future. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!